Yes, I think I see one part in your book on the West where you say, some of my friends in other countries might wonder why I'm giving advice to America on how to become stronger, but I genuinely, want all of the countries in the world to reach their potential, and you come as a friend, and you say this over and over in the book. You go, I'm not criticizing. I'm not here to just list the flaws and follies of the United States. I'm pointing out ways in which this country is hurting itself.
Yeah. So my goal is to help the United States become stronger and more effective.
Yeah. But I want to talk a little bit more about the United Nations. Because the U.S. relationship with the United Nations is a little strange. I mean, you say that in your time there, just looking at your memoir here, one constant was U.S. domination of the United Nations Security Council. And in many ways, the United Nations Security Council is, I think rigged is a strong word, but set up in a way that gives a certain disproportionate or unfair power to the great power countries, and is at a fair system. And yet, in the United States, we still disdain the UN and international law for putting too many constraints on U.S. action, despite our outsized role there. Can you talk a little bit about the U.S. relationship with the United Nations?
Well, the U.S. relationship with the UN is a paradoxical one. I mean, the Americans always complain that the UN is constraining them. The reality is that the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, United States, Russia, China, UK, and France, they are essentially 5 dictators. What do I mean when they say 5 dictators? They cannot be removed. If you had an election in the UN General Assembly to say that we would like to remove, let's say, France as a permanent member, France has the right to veto the resolution. So you cannot remove them. There are 5 dictators. But because of the power that they have, they effectively control the UN. And one thing that the P5 agree upon, even though they quarrel on many issues, they all 5 don't want to have a strong Secretary General. In fact, when they select a Secretary General, the first quality they look for is that the Secretary General must be completely spineless. And if he's not spineless, he cannot be selected. Of course, subsequently, some Secretary Generals discovered to have a spine, like Kofi Annan, who was a very good Secretary General. He was not spineless, But, like the present one, the present Secretary General, most people feel should have taken a much stronger stand on issues like Gaza and, Ukraine and all that, to play a more active role. But he's been very passive, and that's not necessarily a good thing, So I think I've argued that the 5 permanent members should realize that it is now in their interest to see a more effective United Nations. So when they select the next Secretary General, try to pick a dynamic CEO, someone who's brave, ambitious, and driven, and see whether or not we can push the organization to a better direction.
One of the things that comes across in portion of your memoir about your time at the United Nations is just what an extraordinary institution it is. I mean, it really is a place where the peoples of the world, and you say that the representatives that come to the United Nations, they are really the representatives of the people of the countries. You say they are genuinely putting forth those countries' positions, and so you actually have the whole world hashing out these important debates. And if we had an institution where there was a little more fairly structured, we really have something that is the prototype or the beginning of an institution that could really perform quite effective global governance.
Yes, I mean, because at the end of the day, there are 8 billion people on planet Earth. And if you're going to have any kind of global government or global cooperation, you have to involve all 8 billion people in the world. And the only place where the 8 billion people of the world are represented is in the United Nations. And I use a simple boat analogy to explain why we need to cooperate more. in the past, when you have 8 billion people living in 193 separate countries, it was as though they were living on separate boats. They were separated from each other. And indeed, if one boat caught COVID, another boat wouldn't catch COVID. We're on different boats. But the world has effectively shrunk. There's no question whatsoever. We live in a small interdependent world. And so the 8 billion people no longer live in 193 separate boats. The 8 billion people now live in 193 separate cabins on the same boat. And that's why when one cabin got COVID, all 193 cabins got COVID. COVID was a signal that we are on the same boat. So if you're on the same boat, there's no point trying to protect your cabin if the boat is sinking. So therefore, that's the reason why you must step out of our cabins. You must protect our cabins, and you must also protect the global boat as a whole. And that's why you need the United Nations. And that's why you need to develop, in the West especially, leaders who can speak out intelligently and thoughtfully on why some of the global challenges we face, whether it's climate change, whether it's pandemics, whether it's global financial crisis, they can only be solved if all of us come together to solve this problem. And this is a time where the United States of America, instead of moving towards more unilateralism, should be moving towards more multilateralism for the national interest of the United States, to serve the interests of the United States. And that's something our young Americans will understand and grasp and push for.
And just to conclude here then, as I mentioned, to return to where we started, while your books are full of quite depressing examples of horrific strategic blunders that have cost many human lives, of missed opportunities, of misunderstandings, and your books contain warnings about the terrible things that could happen in the future if the West does not, heed these lessons and develop a certain set of humility and self-understanding and understanding of the direction that the world is taking. While all of that is the case, ultimately, you always conclude with this note of optimism. That is to say, if we can develop this kind of deeper understanding of our world and one another, there really is no limit to the human potential, and we could build quite a remarkable future. You yourself, grew up in deep poverty in Singapore. Your story, your story living the Asian century is an incredible story of not just the change in your own circumstances, but the change that you outlined at the beginning in the Asian countries generally. I mean, you saw that happen. You saw really wondrous transformations, and there's no reason we couldn't have more of that in the future.
Yeah, I actually believe I'm still very much optimistic for the future, because I think we have now developed the capabilities to improve the human condition dramatically. So less and less people are starving, maybe except in Gaza. Less and less people are dying, and in conflicts even. So we are moving towards a better human condition, and we can possibly create a much more peaceful and prosperous world than the one we have. We have the resources, we have the means, and we have the intellect to do that. But what is holding us back is that our minds are still set in the 19th and 20th century, especially in geopolitics. And we are focused on zero-sum games about, am I number one or are you number one? And frankly, it doesn't matter if you have the biggest cabin on the boat if the boat is sinking. It makes it meaningless to say I should have the number one cabin. But what's more important is to save the boat as a whole and create a better planet for everybody. And I think it can be done. But to achieve this, the West has got to go through a major mental reboot, because the West doesn't understand how to deal with people of different cultures and different civilizations, because they do think differently, they do act differently, and you have to understand how they think and feel if you want to work with them. And that's what a lot of my writings try to do, to point out that, hey, the rest of the world, they may think very differently from you, but they're also very more than willing to work with you if you treat them with some respect and you approach them with some humility.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。